You remember 1960, of course, who gets elected?
JFK.
Does he get elected by a landslide?
No.
Barely squeaks by, okay? And then what happens to him? Very big political move. He dies.
He died.
Okay. Not good for him, obviously. Then LBJ comes in. And then what does LBJ do to make sure that not only is he going to be guaranteed an election in 1964, but oddly enough, he's going to be guaranteed a loss in 1968. But people are going to love him in 1964. What does he do that causes this? He does a war on poverty. Why is this such a big deal?
Connects federal money to civil rights.
Okay, civil rights with federal money, okay? That means if you oppose federal money, you seem to be opposing civil rights. Big, giant, huge realignment. But it also causes him to not even be able to run in 1968. Who wins in 1968? Nixon. And in fact, he not only wins in 1968, but he wins by the largest landslide in history in 1972. And what is the campaign that he runs on that's in a sense almost pushed because of what LBJ does? Law and order. And can someone explain to me how this happens? How is it that the Republicans focus so much on law and order? What is their little connection? Riots caused by radicals. Alright? That makes sense? And so all you have to do is associate the new civil rights with radicals. And why did I emphasize new civil rights? This one you might not have caught as clearly before we left, because you guys missed the Friday, so it's been like, what, 5 whole days since you guys. The brain may not remember. What is the new civil rights? Remember, between basically 1940s up until 1965, we had the Civil Rights Act of 64, and then the Voting Rights Act of 65. Once you did that, is there really anything more that you can do to make civil discrimination based on race illegal? No. Okay? They pretty much made it as illegal as it can be. And so from this perspective, this is racial equality. When we're thinking civil rights, racial equality. But you remember, civil rights actually incorporates any number of rights. This is always kind of a funny thing. Conservatives like to say this sometimes, and it gets other people upset. But the oldest civil right that we've been talking about, the NRA, is a major civil rights organization. Because what does the NRA support? National Rifle Association. Second Amendment, which is a civil right, the right to bear arms. Okay. Civil rights includes all of them that are in the Bill of Rights. It's any number. We associate it with race, but the odd thing is, we did, especially up to 1965, and then from 1965 up until about 1970, you had this group of baby boomers. So these guys were the ones that were coming into the story late. By the time they're in college, it's 61, 62, 63. Most of the work on the civil rights movement, this most recent civil rights movement, was happening from the World War II through the 1950s, when these kids were literally kids. So once the college kids get involved and they start going in buses down to the South to register the blacks in 1962, 63, call it Freedom Summer, that work has already been done. You're just kind of pushing it over the edge. So when you get these massive national acts, what these acts do is they don't really change the opinion of the country. If you remember, the country has already been pro-civil rights. What it does is it eliminates the last vestiges of opposition from the South. So it's not legal to have some Southerner saying we want segregation. It's gone. So you finished it. But these kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, they just started. So once you pass these laws, right, you look around, and you get kind of idealistic, you get all moved and charged. We can do anything, we made this change, not recognizing that where did most of the work take place? Most of the work took place in the 15 years before they ever came on the scene. But you feel like you're part of it, like you can do anything. And so you made these laws, you passed these laws, and then what? Does this eliminate all naughty people in the world? Does it cause anybody who might be bigoted, anybody who might be rude, anybody who might be impolite, anybody who might do any of these naughty things? Does it cause them to cease to exist? Does it eliminate these people? Of course not. And so what you do is you see this radicalism arise. And radicalism basically blames inequality on the capitalist system. On the system. Unfortunately, and I shouldn't say this, but I will. Unfortunately, these ideas today are all throughout modern academia. You hear it all the time. You get sociology, even psychology sometimes political science. Most of your other historians are basically saying the reason why we have inequality is because of this capitalist system. These are the guys that are going to tell you about the Industrial Revolution and talk about how it was the worst tragedy that happened in American history. But at the time, this is a new idea in the late 60s. And what they're saying is that the system is what's causing racism. The system is what's causing sexism. The system is causing whatever's problem with labor. But the three things: race, class, gender. And so if that's the case, what's the only way to eliminate inequality in race, class, and gender? Change the system. Now, these ideas, unfortunately to me, because you guys know my view, I tend to be more of a progressive. And what I mean by that, of course, is I don't see conflict constantly between two groups of people. Okay? So, this is a dialectical perspective. This is far more common in academia today. But when we're introducing these in the 60s, it's not an academic idea. It's genuinely a radical idea. And the other definition of radicalism is that you have to go outside the system. If you really think the system is corrupt, then you have to go outside the system. So you're not voting, you're rioting. You're blowing up buildings, you're throwing bombs, you're doing all sorts of things. And remember the numbers, how many riots were there between I believe it was 65 and 68? Yeah, like 637. Okay, round number 650. Just a lot of riots. Now, does this mean that all college kids are radical? No. You got to get this right. Well, of course you guys are, but talking about other college kids. Don't worry, silly. Okay, so no, obviously they're not all radical. In fact, what you're dealing with really is a minority. So it's a minority, but it's a vocal minority, because if you blow something up and if you cause a riot, you get attention. What about the 89% or 95% that don't get involved with that? Where do you see them? This is a concept that's going to arise in the 1970s, and it's actually called the silent majority. This will later actually turn into a political movement called the moral majority, but it's not the same thing. The silent majority. It's a kind of a movement that rises up and says, we're not throwing bombs and we're not causing riots, but we're actually a majority. We're most of the people. They get the press, but we are most of the rest of the baby boomers. Nevertheless, it's very true that the press does associate this radicalism. When I say new civil rights, what I really mean by this is this new definition of civil rights. It's not really about race. what would it be? If this is what they're blaming, it's not about race, what would your civil rights be? It's kind of an anti-capitalism. Right? Well, the majority of the country can certainly get behind racial equality. And they do, certainly by 63, 64, 65. The most of the country is very strongly in support of this. Is most of the country then backing this new interpretation of kind of anti-capitalism? No. In fact, most of the country does not back it. Most of the country is opposed to it, which goes back to why is this such a big deal for the Republicans? You get 650 riots. Violent crime is increasing 10%, even though the population is increasing 1%. Property crime is increasing 11%, even though population is only increasing 1%. Drug use is going through the roof. And you have these riots. And so it's an easy association to make. Okay, the Democrats are all about civil rights, right? Well, we're all about racial equality too, but you don't define civil rights as racial equality anymore. Now what are you defining civil rights as? Some guy out there who's saying expletive deleted, you guys know what I mean by expletive deleted. Expletive deleted, where's the man, whatever, okay, beat the man. So that's what we associate with civil rights movement, which isn't really anything to do with race, but it has to do with this anti-capitalism. And so law and order then rises up. And the majority of the country supports it. Not only do they support it in '68, but after Nixon gets elected, what happens to the crime rates? They do begin to go down. And so he wins in a huge landslide in '72. Now I'm going to tell you, most of my historian colleagues hate this lecture that I'm giving because they are on this side, right? So they talk about this kind of being the rise, and then this terrible loss when Nixon gets elected. Well, you can interpret it, that's fine. But you can't deny the fact that the rest of the country strongly supported it. And why? Huge reaction to these riots.